19th. We're going to talk about 4 or 5 of his films, principally the last one, Bombay, Our City. I told you when we were getting ready for this that you'd already been interviewed so many times. I didn't want to cover territory you'd already covered. But I think maybe we should summarize it anyway at the beginning, because people looking at this might not have read some of the interviews. So maybe if you could start by just giving a auto-film biography.
Yeah, well,
your formation and your influences and your first films and that kind of thing.
but I first started shooting as a student. I had a scholarship in America in 1970 to do sociology at Brandeis University, and there was a film department. There was a theater arts department, and I borrowed equipment from them to shoot some anti-Vietnam War demonstrations. And so that was the first time I started playing with the film camera. I'd done still photography before that.
Is this also where you learned all your Dylan songs?
Probably, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And after that, I came back to India in 1972 and worked in a village project in Madhya Pradesh, while driving a tractor and teaching Hindi and stuff like that. Nothing to do with film, except that in those days I made a film strip for a tuberculosis clinic that we helped to run to motivate rural patients to continue the treatment of tuberculosis, which is long-term treatment.
Was this your first exposure to villages?
Yeah.
You're originally from Bombay, aren't you?
Yeah. So that was, yeah. So I spent 2 years there, and I made a film strip, which is just a series of still photographs, slides with a sound tape, a cassette tape that tells a story. And that was used by several clinics. And then in '74 I went to Bihar, where a student movement had begun against corruption and against authoritarianism. And that was called the JP movement, after Jai Narayan, who was a Gandhian, sort of left Gandhian. And this student movement became a mass movement, and at that time I started to work with the movement. And on a particular day when there were going to be there was expected to be a lot of police violence against demonstrators, my job was just to keep a record of police violence, if any. And so I borrowed some equipment and shot the day's demonstration on Super 8. And then
Bihar is the state where the traditional feudal property relations are the most violent, aren't they?
Yeah. And so after having got that footage, which was basically police attacking non-violent demonstrators, we decided that it could be developed into a longer film, and I borrowed 16mm equipment and recorded rural meetings and things that the movement was having. The idea in those days was to make an instrument for the movement to use back, to reflect upon itself and to reinforce what I saw as the positive aspects of the movement. The fact that there was a real potential for social awakening. I mean, things against caste, against dowry, against... I mean, it wasn't just political change that the movement was talking about. But unfortunately, the movement was crushed by the declaration of the emergency in 1975. And so the film, at this point, it was just completed in the same month that a few months before the emergency was declared. And so I could never actually use it as an instrument of the movement, because it went underground as soon as the emergency was declared. Then the film was shown to basically sympathetic audiences in India, because we couldn't really take a chance, because if it had been discovered by the authorities, we would have been in jail and the film would have been destroyed. So around this time I got admission into McGill University, and with a teaching assistantship. So 3 months into the emergency, I left India and was able to smuggle a print out by sending it out in other people's baggage and stuff like that, in portions of it, and then reassembled it in Canada, made an English version, and then showed that film outside of India during the period of
the Waves
of Revolution. Yeah, and so that film was used outside India as to raise public opinion against the emergency. Then when the emergency ended, I came back to India, and hoping that everything had, democratic rights had been restored and all the political prisoners had been released. But we found that many political prisoners, especially Marxists, Leninists, and Mizo's and Nagas, some of them were still not being released. So the new government had broken its promise of releasing everybody unconditionally. So I made a film about political prisoners in India.
Mizos and Nagas are the tribal groups in the eastern part of the country. Northeastern part.
Yeah. And so that film is called Prisoners of Conscience, which was made after the emergency, but it deals with the period during the emergency and before the emergency as well. It's basically a film which is trying to ask why, what is the social structure that makes people fight in the first place, and what happens to those people in prison.
You basically had more resources for this film than for the first, didn't you?
Slightly more, but it's still black and white, still 16mm, and well, 16mm all my films are. But this was also a very low budget film, but slightly better than Waves of Revolution, because Waves of Revolution, some of it was Super 8.
Yes, but at least it has direct sound interviews and.
In Waves of Revolution, there are direct sound interviews, except that it's not using synchronous equipment. So I had recorded on a cassette recorder and used a crank camera. So the voice and the picture doesn't synchronize, but they were recorded at the same time.
And Prisoners of Conscience has a lot of remarkable footage taken inside the prisons, doesn't it?
Not a lot, a little bit. Because there was only one prison that I was able to get into. We were denied permission in all the other prisons, even though the emergency had ended. Anyway, so that's Prisoners of Conscience, and then after that I went back to Canada to finish my master's, which I'd begun earlier. And during this time, I made a film in Canada called A Time to Rise about Indian immigrants in the West Coast who formed a union called the Canadian Farm Workers Union. So it's basically a film about unionization and fight against racism, which was made in Canada with another Canadian filmmaker whose name is Jim Monroe.
Okay. And following your degree, you came back here and started work.
Yeah, and I came back to India in '82 and began a film on slum evictions, because when I came back I found that in Bombay a large-scale demolition campaigns were being carried out as the city was trying to beautify itself at the expense of a large section of the population that lives on footpaths and in pavements and in slums, which the city now considers as an eyesore. And so this film took 3 years to make, and it's called Bombay, Our City.
So it came out in '85?
Yeah, it was finished in '85, beginning of '85.
I see. And so since then you've been distributing the film as well as working on your new film on communalism.
Yeah, well, after every film that I make, it takes a few years before I start another one, because quite a lot of time is spent in taking the films around and showing them and having discussions with the audiences. And in '85, after Bombay Our City, we in fact formed an organization called Samvad, which means dialogue, whose job it is to in fact create some kind of an alternative distribution network. And we haven't really been able to do that. I mean, we had thought that we'd be able to raise enough money to buy a van and equip it with the projector and maybe video equipment, so that we could travel around to rural areas and small centers and be like a mobile cinema. But we never raised enough money for the van. And because we also decided not to take any foreign funding, so it was that made things.
You decided against foreign funding to avoid political charges?
Not just to avoid political charges, but to also be self-sufficient.
Well, let's talk a little bit about distribution, since we've already gotten into that. The films division also has a large mobile projection network, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So will these did these villagers, had they already seen a lot of documentary films in that setting?
Well, the films division there's a field publicity unit, but it's really a propaganda unit for the government, and the stuff that they do is generally very boring propaganda, which I've worked in rural areas and I've seen people's response to those films, family planning films and things like that, which they're not at all bothered with them. They get totally bored. And there's only a handful of what I would consider reasonably good films made by the films division and shown by them.
So the audiences you've reached have already seen such films and are not interested?
In fact, it's because the films division films are so have been shown a lot, and Doordarshan documentaries have been shown a lot. That Doordarshan means the television. That in fact documentary itself has a bad name. People get bored at the thought when you say, "Oh, this is a documentary film." Immediate response is, "Oh God, that's going to be terribly boring, or it's going to be propaganda." So, I mean, government propaganda, as opposed to ours. But so we've got to fight against that. It's only after we can get the audience to sit down and start to watch, say, a film like Bombay City, that people get surprised that they find it interesting, because it's not the normal kind of films division type of documentary. It's not overloaded with commentary and.
So you think there are both formal, technical reasons and also content reasons why they find them different?
Oh, definitely, yeah. And also, it's you can't just take films into the countryside or wherever if you have no connection with the people. I mean, and if you're not going through any organization that has connection with the people, if you just go there because it's a job that you have to do, and you've got to fill in a quota of, we've shown the film so many times, then it's very mechanical, and there's no dialogue that takes place. But in the way that we are distributing our films, I mean, for instance, my films, it's always through some kind of an organization that is working in the area, doing, say, civil liberties work or political work or trade unions or whatever, so that they're using it as part of their ongoing activities. It's not a one-shot thing where people just are called to see a film.
So these organizations already have 16mm equipment and they're used to showing films?
No, that's a big hurdle that has to be overcome. Most of the activist groups that I believe ought to be using films much more aren't really geared for doing it. They haven't taken it up as a priority. I mean, it's not often that you'd find a trade union that would put emphasis on, say, showing videos and films and working with their workers on that basis. But it's happening slowly. I mean, wherever we've done it, it's had a good response and people see the potential of it.
Have you started also showing video, or is that?
Yeah, in fact, much more video than film nowadays, because as I said, the van idea didn't really get going because of financial problems, and also setting up 16mm screenings, although we do it quite a lot in slums even and things like that, is a very technically difficult thing to achieve. There's so many technical errors that take place during screenings, and that, for instance, there's not enough power supply, and you're running the projector at half the speed, and the sound is terrible. It's difficult to get all those things right enough to make the screening, because your content, at least the content of my films, is not very entertaining in itself. So to have technical problems on top of that makes things difficult. Video is much more foolproof, since less things go wrong. I mean, the problem is that you have a much smaller audience, but if you can work around that, work with activist groups and things, so then the discussion is possible. And then the video is useful. And also, because it's video, we can show an English film and translate directly. We're turning the volume down or stopping it and talking and then starting it again. So it's more maneuverable.
And there's enough video equipment in these centers now to make this worthwhile?
The video, one can rent it. Yeah, so one can rent a VCR and show. I think that's what groups do.
Something you mentioned the other day was the whole concept of a community television set. Does this, you said that the communalists, for example, were going around preventing audiences from watching Thomas on community television sets. Are these community sets a widespread phenomenon?
They're not actually officially community sets. They're just somebody in the neighborhood has a TV. Say somebody in a slum has a TV, and that family, everybody gathers around at their place and watches it with them. In a few places it's officially, everybody's actually paying for it as well, but that's rare. It's normally just social activity.
And you make use of these informal community settings?
Sometimes, but usually it's just that you go in and rent your own equipment and bring it in. You find a monitor, you just rent the VCR.
Talking a little bit more about exhibition, can you tell us maybe about audiences and how they react to the films? For example, are rural audiences a lot different from urban audiences? Your audiences have already seen lots of Hindi films, for example. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
So in my situation, I have to, that's the given, and that's what makes showing a documentary so difficult, because people are already conditioned by the entertainment available, and their attention span has been affected. I mean, a few years ago, before the video boom, one would have a much easier time getting an audience to watch anything on the screen, video or film. But now, because there's quite a lot of video around, and it's it's always the commercial Hindi cinema that's being shown on the video. So people expect that. When you bring a video set or you bring the movie screen, people expect that kind of cinema. And if they don't get it, the initial response is one of disappointment. Unless there's a group that's already prepared the audience for what they're going to see, why they're going to see it, and there's some kind of political work being done, and then it's different. So most of the time, Bombay Art City and things is being used as I said, ongoing political organizing, and in those situations it works very well. But it doesn't work very well if, say, at the Ganpati festival, where there's traditionally commercial films that are shown in the slums or wherever in working class areas, that we just replace the commercial film with, say, Bombay Art City, and say, okay, today we're going to have Bombay Art City. People aren't going to be happy about that.
Has this affected the way you think about making films? For example, do you try to use more music? Or?
No, not. Music I always used in all my films, because I don't use background music, recorded music. I usually use music that the people are performing who are the subjects of the film. And because I think that music is I mean, I like it, so that's why I use it. But I think it works in terms of communication very directly.
Do you find that, getting back to my original question, that rural audiences react differently from urban audiences?
I've shown with Bombay City in so many different parts of the country that even urban audiences change from place to place. Like urban audience in Kerala is totally different from urban audience in Bombay. Rural audiences, I don't have a lot of experience of showing Bombay City to rural audiences because we've mainly shown it in urban areas. We have shown it in rural areas, but not very often. Those screenings were again done by, say, the screenings that we did there's a print now in Madhya Pradesh, in Chhattisgarh. The print has been given to a mine workers union, which is also working with rural workers, agricultural laborers, and so I went to some of those screenings and they were a lot of fun. Audiences reacted. It was huge audiences and they reacted very well. They learned the song in the film and started singing, and soon after this film was shown, and for them the film actually was almost like a warning about what will happen if they leave the rural area and go to the city, and what happens to people like them who do make that choice, and they could then evaluate what life in countryside was like, and oppose it to life of, say, a migrant in the city. So it wasn't exactly the same thing that they were getting from the film as an urban audience was getting.
Seeing the film with various kinds of audiences, I'm talking about Bombay, our city, do you recognize any mistakes you might have made in the film or things that you want to change in your future approaches?
I wouldn't say mistakes, but I can see how it's very difficult to make one film, the same film, to be effective I'm using the word effective, mechanically as in terms of its use value, in terms of leading to action for change of some kind. To make it directly for that, to work effectively both for, say, a slum audience or a rural audience, as well as for an upper middle class audience or an upper class audience. Basically, I've made just one film and it's being used as, say, consciousness raiser for the upper middle class also, or middle class, to sort of win over a few people or to reduce their self-righteous sort of behavior and reduce the repression of those who are in power. And I'm using the film also as an organizing tool to unite slum dwellers and to unite working class. So it's not a one film which was meant to do only one job might have been able to do that more effectively. But I'm really using the same film to do several different things. And different versions, different language versions, but the same film.
And you're going to continue trying to meet several different needs with a single film?
Yeah, because I'm not making a very mechanical product, which is I don't have it very clear in my head that I'm trying to do just one thing with the film. What was I saying?
About a multi-function kind of filmmaking. So the film has been effective on all those levels with middle class?
No, what I was saying is that I'm not making a very mechanical product which is meant to do one job. It's not in my the way I approach film is it's not a leaflet that I'm writing for an immediate demonstration or anything like that. It's really I'm not even completely clear about what I'm doing, in the sense that I'm just responding to things as I find them. I mean, I would like the films to be used to intervene in situations which, I mean, they are interventionists directly, but they're not, how shall I say, they're not, I'm not clear of all the implications.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the structure and the content of the films now, especially Bombay, our city. I think what's unique about your work is the way you use speech and voice and direct sound. Certainly in the context of other Indian filmmakers, you have been very original in that area. Would you say this is partly because of your North American formation, or would you say it's also a political attitude you have? Or?
No, because the films that I made even before I went abroad, like Waves of Revolution, was the film on the Jai Bhim Comrade. It wasn't before I went, but before I really started. That was the first half an hour film that I made. Was also had no commentary in it. It was there is a voiceover, but that's just translating what people are saying. I mean, the version that you've seen is in English, so there's a single voice that translates everything, but there's no commentary. It's music and it's interviews and it's speeches and things like that were taking place. But so I don't know. I don't think that's. It's because I'm much more interested in finding things than in creating things. Mm-hmm. I'm not making films because of any great artistic motivation. I'm more interested in sort of bringing people's attention to things that already exist.
So this is why you listen to people so carefully and are able to transmit their voices in your films.
Yeah, for instance, in Bombay, our city, really the problems I saw it was that people would, the problem, say, for the middle class, or people like me, upper middle class, was that we looked at slums. We never actually entered them, and we never actually talked to the people in them, so that people were just visuals for us. And so the thing that needed to be done was that the people needed voices. Visuals everybody has. I mean, that's the difference between a photograph or a postcard and a documentary.
I've heard from other Indian filmmakers that it's impossible to shoot in communities on the street, that it's very difficult to get people to talk naturally into the microphone, and you've proved them all wrong. I mean, how was it possible to go into the slum in Bombay and get them to speak so articulately?
I never had problem. In fact, I don't understand how people say that, because most of the time people love to speak, and in fact you just have to find out who's bullshitting and who isn't, because people are always dying to speak. Mm-hmm. And so it's just a process of selection. I mean, and in Bombay City it was almost a natural selection. I found that the women, generally speaking, the women who spoke most of the time almost all of the time were completely spontaneous and weren't aware of camera, or they didn't care. So they were just there, and nobody allowed them to speak before, at least in public, and this was their chance, and so they were.
So these weren't
happy to do it. They really wanted to do it. And
so these weren't already women with leadership roles?
No. In Bombay City, it was completely random. It wasn't. I didn't go out searching for the militant women's activists. I actually just went and filmed whoever was willing to speak, and there were many people. And generally the women were militant, analytical, and passionate about what they were saying.
You approached them through people you already knew in the slum? Or?
No, in Bombay City I didn't do that. I didn't really go through any organization. We did start an organization, but that was after the film making began. Well, no, that's not strictly speaking true, in the sense that I had connection with groups like People's Union for Civil Liberties, who were fighting a legal case, and I was working with the legal aid group also to help fight demolitions and get a stay order from the court and things like that. So some people I got into contact through that, but very often I would just go to a slum which had just been demolished and start talking to people.
And the theater group in the film?
This theater group belonged to a political organization, a left organization that was working in the slum area. And the people in the theater group are slum dwellers, most of them. But the group didn't just grow up from the slum itself.
Are they doing a similar kind of cultural work too?
They and other groups. They're not the only group of its kind. In fact, street theater and music is a common way of political organizing for those who are doing that kind of work.
So, with the various groups that are organizing in the slums always have this kind of cultural component to it?
It's very important. It's probably one of the best ways of entering into an area and getting people's interest and involving people from the slum to participate creatively in their own.
When these audiences are looking at the film, I'm sure they identify very strongly with the people from the slum who are speaking, or with the music and the theater. How do they react to the parts where you are criticizing the citizens, the upper class?
Since the technique, that's what I meant when I mentioned it earlier, that this film could have been more effective in a purely mechanical sense had I, instead of, say if I was making a film just to mobilize slum dwellers into demonstrations or actions and immediate sort of things, it would have been more effective to do away with all those long cinema verite kind of things with the upper class, which don't work very well in terms of, because all the subtlety is gone in translation. I mean, when say the police commissioner is talking about the image of policemen and how the advertising bodies should improve the image of the police, and how they should teach karate to boys in schools and colleges to fight against the hordes. All that is a loss in translation. So it might have been more effective to have a harder commentary. But I really didn't want to do that. So anyway, as it stands now, there's quite the sections of which are in English and which I've translated into Hindi, and the Hindi version don't work very well. They work as visuals. I mean, you can see, well, this is the upper class and this is where they live, but they don't work in audio so well.
What about the musical satirical sequences?
Like using the Tchaikovsky to... I'm not sure exactly whether they work or not, but people accept it, so I'm not sure what that music means. I know they enjoy the jazz sequence a lot at the end. That's like fun. It's like disco. But,
so this kind of indirect or satirical kind of rhetoric you feel is useful and appropriate?
It's very effective when I'm showing the film to the upper class, those sequences, because there's no language problem, there's no translation involved, and this is the voice that they've always heard. This is the opinions that they've heard, and they recognize it, so it's effective there. They recognize it, and yet they're embarrassed by it on the screen in juxtaposition with all the other things that they've seen. So those things create self-doubt and self-questioning amongst the upper class. So, but those aren't the sections that work best in the slum areas.
let's maybe go on and talk a little bit about your current work. You said you didn't want to talk too much about it, but for a North American audience, it was okay maybe to touch upon it.
Well, the current film that I'm doing is more difficult than anything that I've done before because it deals with sectarianism, religious sectarianism, fundamentalism. So, it can make a lot of enemies from all different areas because.
So you're even more worried about it politically than the other one?
Not worried, but yeah, it has to be done carefully. And the most difficult problem about this film is that what one is trying to do is to say, people shouldn't kill each other, and to say that without sounding really stupid is difficult, because it's such an obvious fact, but and that it's also an obvious fact that the working class and the poor are being manipulated and are being divided against each other on religious grounds, on caste grounds. And so the message of the film is so straightforward that really what the challenge is to find ways of saying it that will be useful in the sense that people would say it would strike a new chord, get people's attention, and as well as be credible.
I saw a few of the rushes, and most of it was demonstration footage and speeches. But I understand that you are shooting other kinds of material too. Can you talk about the kind of material you're gathering?
No, I don't really want to do that. I think we should wait till the film's ready. I don't want to talk about because I'm not even clear exactly how it's going to be in the end. I don't have a script. I'm not working with a preset sort of idea. I'm keeping a record of things as they happen. And what seems to be happening is growing fundamentalism, which people are beginning to fight against it. So I'm trying to document both sides, both the fundamentalists as well as those who are resisting, those who are aware that this could lead to fascism and are beginning to mobilize against that.
Have you managed, the way you did in Bombay, our city, to get people who are actual victims of the situation analyzing the situation and talking about their own personal experience?
Not much. No, I've not done that a lot. I'm concentrating more almost from the other side. I'm trying to understand why the people who propagate fundamentalism do it.
Is this basically how you made Bombay also, without a kind of a clear script in mind, but gradually gathering material and structure?
Yeah, all the films, in fact, not just Bombay. All the films have been structured only on the editing table, not before.
Can you talk a little bit more about the editing procedure for, say Bombay?
Well, it took 8 months to edit.
Mm-hmm. And you edited
about a
it
year
as you went along, as you were shooting also?
A little bit, not really edit, but at least put it into sync and see what there is. Mm-hmm. The editing is what I enjoy most, and is where the film gets its structure and all that.
So it was 8 months of trial and error?
Trial and error, but 8 months was also not because it need have been 8 months, it was also because it was so difficult to get access to editing facilities and things like that. One was always being kicked out of one place and had to move to another place.
This was before you had your Steenbeck?
Yeah. So that's one problem solved now.
Did you have sort of a loose structure in mind in terms of showing the problem, showing the people involved, and questioning a solution, or did you have some kind of loose framework? like that, or was it more on the level of visuals and dramatic scenes that...
No, I had, because we were working with slum dwellers and also working in groups that were trying to win over a section of the public opinion on the side against demolitions. There was a whole lot of theoretical things that I wanted done in the film. There was a whole lot of, like, I wanted to make it clear where these people came from. The fact that they weren't attracted to the big city for their lights, or to, because of the movie stars. They came here because there was nothing left in the countryside. I wanted to deal with hawkers and with people on the pavement. There was a whole lot of, I wanted to deal with the question of influx, the question of schooling, the question of religious tensions, caste and religious problems. So one could have written a theoretical exercise, but I wanted to find all that in interviews and in the people, rather than to have to say it in words.
Do you just trying to figure out my question. There isn't a very explicit discussion of possible solutions in the film beyond the general principle of people taking control of their lives. And was this deliberate?
Yeah, absolutely deliberate, in the sense that I think solutions have been suggested hundreds of times, but there's no political will to implement those solutions. And what the film was actually pointing out was why there's no political will. Because it's not, the class in power is not the class that wants to do anything about, has nothing to gain by improving slum conditions or housing for the poor. And I mean, I didn't want to leave it at that. I didn't want to just make a rhetorical statement. It's not that I don't want the film to be used constructively for immediate improvements, but I don't think that if one just said the word sites and services project or low-cost housing or technological solutions that could be found, that leads to anything. Those kind of things are always possible to do once there's an atmosphere where people are actually interested and people are actually motivated. And that's the point where it should be done, not before that. To give those solutions before there's any desire is pointless. It's just a theoretical exercise.
So you see your role as more of contributing to the atmosphere.
My attempt in Bombay City was to break through the complacency of the upper class, the self-righteousness of the upper class, to say, well, I mean, these are citizens with equal rights, and you have no right to demolish their homes without alternative accommodation, if at all. And so that was the main thrust of the whole film. It's not. It's the next stage where we start discussing how we actually go about finding shelter and finding land. And the film also makes it clear that there is land, because I interviewed landlords who owned large areas of land and weren't willing to use it for shelter for the homeless.
By the way, I meant to ask you while we were editing, talking about editing, your ratio is very small, I imagine, is it?
It's increasing with every film.
Is it?
Yeah.
So what was it in Bombay?
About 7 or 8 to 1.
Yeah, I'm sure with Waves of Revolution it was 1-1.
2.5 to 1.
2.5 to 1?
2 to 1, yeah, roughly. But it's also because I wasn't familiar with filmmaking very much, and so there were lots of technical errors, and you had to throw out some things completely, and like even the titles, you had to shoot about 5 times to get them right. Never got them right. But it's been I spend more time fundraising, and so the film technical qualities have improved over the last 10, 15 years.
With the communalism project, it looks as if your ratio is going to be very high.
Much higher, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about this fundraising, how you finance your films?
Through people who believe in the work, through small donations, sometimes 5,000 rupees, 2,000 rupees, even 100 rupees from a large number of people, as well as now my films, my earlier films, I'm able to sell them sometimes. So
abroad or?
Yeah, abroad and in India.
Which ones? For example,
Bombay City.
Who would the
Time
clients in India be who would buy Bombay?
I've sold the print to the National Film Archives, to the Academy of Training for IAS officers. In IAS, Administrative Service Officers. They bought a print, which was quite a nice surprise. And the UNICEF has bought a print, and another organization that works in slums in West Bengal bought a print. And probably in Kerala, the left front government will buy a print. And videos I've sold a lot, almost 100.
To similar kinds of groups?
To small groups, and to the People's Science Movement, which did a jatha, a march, a caravan all over the country a few months ago. They bought 30 cassettes.
So you must almost have made your money back.
Yeah.
So there does seem to be a viable basis for this kind of film work in India, provided the...
Well, no, I mean, all this getting money back would still not have covered the cost of the film, but I was also able to sell the film to Channel 4 in England, which brought in quite a lot of money, and a few other places. So it's with all that together that the film has recovered all its money.
So otherwise, would you say that it's impossible to make a go of it making social issue films in India without foreign sales?
It's not impossible, but it's difficult. It is possible if you work very hard and build up a very strong network. And if the film is that useful, that the groups involved find it useful enough to buy their own copies and use it regularly, it can be done.
One thing I was surprised to see is that there's really no 16mm independent film distribution, rental distribution in India. Why has that never...
There is, but the economics, we do it, for instance, but the economics are defeating, in the sense that print in India in the laboratory costs quite a lot more than a print would cost abroad, because of duties and things like that. The raw stock itself is more expensive.
So the print cost, I understand these days, for a half-hour 16mm film is about 500 Canadian dollars.
Yeah.
5,000 rupees.
Right.
And
that, say, if that's a print cost, and you would say that the average projectors are pretty bad, quite a lot of them, and if you were just sending your film around anywhere blindly, hoping for the best in terms of its use, you'd be lucky if the film lasted 100 screenings. So if you calculate how much you'd have to charge per rental to recover the print costs, it comes to 5,000 for this half-an-hour film. Well, my film again is 1.5-hour film, so it costs much more. So in order to recover my print costs of Bombay City, I have to how much does it work out to?
It works out to about 150 rupees per rental, but that's
if you are able to show it that many times, and you have no other expenses.
Seems very high to me.
And if you have no other expenses.
Yes.
Yeah. So it doesn't happen very often. We hardly ever recover print costs by rentals. Which is why, for me, it's necessary to sell the film abroad in order to pay for the distribution that I do here, to subsidize it.
It also makes the situation of alternative and independent filmmakers completely different in India than it is in the West, where there is an efficient rental
But even in the West, I mean, I've lived abroad for a few years, and I know that the documentary distribution is not very efficient, not very paying. I mean, you can charge more money for rentals abroad, but you don't get that much of a bulk sale or rentals in order to pay for the making of the film. Ultimately, films are made, documentaries are made on grants, even abroad. They're not made on it's not a commercially viable thing, except for, say, specific documentaries like say something on life saving, or on something which has a market that's easily identifiable and things like that. But if you were to make social, political documentaries and you got no grants from anybody, and there was no National Film Board to help, etc., not many filmmakers would survive.
None of which you have here. You don't have a film board, and you don't have grants, and so you're really in a very tight situation.
So there are very few of us who actually can do it, and I can do it because I've built up some contacts in my stay abroad, and can actually find some people who'll use my films there as well. I mean, so therefore there's some income that comes from outside India, and also that over the last 15 years I've built support network inside India as well, of people who are using the films regularly and feel the need to support it as best they can.
It sounds also as if the little clusters of people like yourself around the country aren't as coordinated as they could be in terms of sharing networks or interlocking networks, and I'm just wondering about that. For example, there are similar people working in Calcutta. Is there any potential for intercommunication or exchange between those two networks?
There's potential, but it has to be done not mechanically, but actually out of working together. I've tried to do these things before, so that I wouldn't want to get into something on a theoretical idea anymore. I wouldn't want to say, okay, let's have a cooperative, collective, that kind of thing, without knowing who the people are, without having worked with them for a long period of time, developed trust and liking for each other, etc., over a period of time, and then as a logical consequence of that, you work together. So that's how I work together with many other people, but not on the basis of a theoretical ideal anymore. If you know what I'm saying.
Yes, I do.
I mean, I work, for instance, with Odessa in Kerala, but we've grown to like each other over a period of time, and so I wouldn't do it now out of any ideological compulsions. I would do it because I have friends and we like each other and we work together.
At the present time, is there any forum for encouraging these kinds of friendships? I mean, you were down at the film festival and meeting with Odessa in that setting.
No, what I feel is that, as in everything, there's a lot more people actually in the medium than genuinely want to use the medium for what they say they're doing. I mean, a lot more people are doing it than are actually using their films in the way that one would expect those kind of films to be used. And it'll take time before one identifies who's actually working whose work is really being used in an ongoing way for political work or social work and things like that. And then once one identifies those people, then that unity can develop. But there's a whole lot of other stuff which will just drain our energy if we try to do it in a hurry. A whole lot of blind alleys.
Yes, I'm sure. Okay. I don't know whether we've covered everything systematically, but I feel that we've had a good talk. Do you feel there's anything we've left out or you want to add?
No, I don't think. I think it's good. I mean, I hope so. I don't know.
Are you hungry?
Yeah, let's have breakfast.
Okay. We'll edit this down a little bit and we'll see a little bit less rambling.
Yeah, I think it needs editing quite a lot. A little bit.
I think we've already talked so much that it's hard to sort of have a fresh